Hello, and welcome to the Safe Work New South Wales webinar. The title of this session today is Risk Management, and this is one in a series of webinars specifically designed to help construction site supervisors to understand the importance of their roles and the major impact they have in maintaining safe and productive work sites. My name is Gary Colthorpe, and I'm a Senior Inspector with Safe Work New South Wales, and I'll be co-presenting this session with Assistant State Inspector Stephen Charles. Thanks for joining us today, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. It's great to be here.
It certainly is. Just to break it up today, Steve and I will alternate between us as we go through this presentation. The content of this webinar has been prepared to try to help you to understand the principles of risk management and why it's such an important part of establishing and maintaining a health and safety on site. Wouldn't you agree, Steve?
Yeah, it certainly is, Gary. And we'll see in the webinar today how systematically identifying hazards and risk in a workplace is a critical component in an effective injury prevention program.
That's exactly right. And we're really hoping that by the end of this session today, you'll have a really clear understanding of what's involved in effective risk management. Okay, so let's make a start by looking at the topics we're going to cover in this webinar. Firstly, we'll discuss the management commitment required to achieve a truly effective risk management strategy in the workplace. And then we'll look at what are you required to do by law? What does the legislation say about your duties in relation to risk management? We'll discuss risk identification on a construction site and the options available to manage them. And then, when should you use a risk management strategy? We'll look at the hierarchy of controls and what it tells us about hazard elimination and risk control. And then we'll look at when should you review the risk controls that you have in place. And then take a look at the readily available risk management tools. There's no doubt that for a risk management to be truly effective in the workplace, the person conducting the business or undertaking, who we usually refer to as a PCBU, and who's often the employer or the business owner, needs to have a strong commitment to ensuring high standards of work health and safety in the workplace. We'll see later in this session that a PCBU has specific duties under the law to manage health and safety risks in the workplace. We'll also see that supervisors can have these same duties to the extent they're able to influence and control health and safety on site. A PCBU should always lead by example in all aspects of health and safety in the workplace to ensure that everyone involved shares their commitment. Managing risks on site also needs cooperation from everyone involved in the workplace, including workers, designers of plant and structures, suppliers, manufacturers, and any other business associated with the site. Managing commitment is about demonstrating that you're serious about health and safety, you're serious about identifying and controlling hazards and risks, and you're committed to ensuring that other duty holders do the same. When managing risks in the workplace, we need to remember that there are both physical and psychological risks to consider, which we'll discuss in more detail in this webinar. So how does a PCBU, such as an employer or a business owner, demonstrate commitment to managing hazards in the workplace? Well, firstly, you need to get involved in all aspects of health and safety and have a detailed understanding of the hazards and risks associated with your operations and your work practices. When the management of an organisation is committed to managing hazards in the workplace, they ensure that work health and safety is top of mind and discussed openly and often throughout the business. Operations are supported by up-to-date documents, training and information, and time and money is invested in health and safety, such as investing in products and plant to eliminate hazards wherever possible. Also, that there's regular consultation with all duty holders, including workers, and seeking their input on workable risk control measures. Workers understand their health and safety responsibilities and have the knowledge and skills required to enable them to undertake their work safely. And health and safety values and behaviours are evident throughout the workplace. Steve is now going to take us through the next couple of slides relating to what the legislation says about your responsibilities to identify reasonably foreseeable hazards on a construction site. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Before we go through the next few slides, we have a bit of a disclaimer. We're going to talk about some of the key clauses in the legislation, but we're just going to mention the highlights and paraphrase rather than quote the legislation word for word. This is not legal advice. We're just trying to help you understand a number of the key responsibilities that you need to be aware of in your role as a supervisor. To review all of your legal responsibilities and the full details on these requirements, you'll need to look up the Work Health and Safety Act 2011 and the Work Health and Safety Regulations 2017, which are both available online. You certainly need to be aware of what Section 19 of the Work Health and Safety Act says, which is a person conducting a business or undertaking who, as we said earlier, we can think of as an employer or a business owner. They have the primary duty of care to ensure the health and safety of workers engaged by them, and this includes providing and maintaining a work environment without the risk to health and safety, a safe plant and structures, for example, guarding on machinery such as grinders, cement mixers, and for structures, temporary props for the freshly laid brick walls. Safe systems of work, as well as ensuring the safe use of handling and storage of plant, structures and substances. Chemicals are often overlooked, for example. And also includes providing adequate facilities for the welfare of workers. So if employing women, they should have their own facilities. Information, training, instruction or supervision necessary to prevent all persons from risk to the health and safety arising from the work carried out as part of the business or undertaking in construction training and inductions are so important so that each worker can perform their task in a safe yet interactive manner, and that the health of workers and the conditions at the workplace are monitored for the purpose of preventing workers' illnesses or injuries. You definitely need to understand the requirements of Section 16 of the Work Health and Safety Act. This section makes it clear that more than one person can have the same duty and must comply with it, even if another person has that same duty. And each person must discharge their duty to the extent they have the capacity to influence and control it. So what does this mean for you as a construction site supervisor? It means that you have the capacity to influence and control health and safety on site. Then you have the legal duty to do so, irrespective of whether someone else has that same duty. There can be multiple duty holders on a construction site, such as the principal contractor, project manager, site supervisor, and the subcontractor supervisors and their workers. And whilst role descriptions may differ between supervisors and workers, work health and safety responsibilities are the same. No one in a supervisory role on a work site should ever say that it's someone else's responsibility to manage health and safety. A hazard is generally defined as anything that has the potential to cause harm to a person. For example, building debris in access ways is a hazard. And Clause 34 of the Work Health and Safety Regulations refer to the duty to identify hazards and states that a duty holder in managing risk to health and safety must identify reasonably foreseeable hazards that could give rise to the risk to health and safety. And we can expect that a construction site potentially will contain a multitude of workplace hazards due to the concentration and nature of the activities being undertaken. Also, it's a fast-paced work environment. And Clause 35 of the Work Health and Safety Regulations refers to managing risk to health and safety and states that a duty holder in managing risk to health and safety must A, eliminate the risk so far as reasonably practicable, and B, if it's not reasonably practicable, to eliminate the risk, then minimise those risks so far as reasonably practicable. Of course, the safest way to manage a hazard is to remove it completely, wherever possible. But where you can't remove the hazard completely, then you'll need to manage the risk that workers remain exposed to. So let's consider a risk. A risk can be defined as the possibility of harm, such as death, injury or illness, that might occur when exposed to a hazard. Often risk is measured by the probability of the harm occurring and the severity of the harm. For example, a worker on a first floor slab laying tiles on a balcony where there are no barriers to prevent a fall could be considered a high risk, where the risk is a fall. The legislation often uses the statement "so far as reasonably practicable," as we just read in the previous slide. So let's look at what it actually means. There is an explanation as defined under Section 18 of the Work Health and Safety Act. It says that reasonably practical in relation to a duty to ensure health and safety means that which is reasonably able to be done, taking into account the following: the likelihood of the hazard or the risk occurring, the degree of harm that might result from the hazard or risk, what the person concerned knows or ought reasonably to know about the hazard or the risk, and the ways of eliminating or minimising the risk. For example, there are many codes of practices to assist with the knowledge to control the risk, and you can find these on the Safe Work website. The availability and suitability of ways to eliminate or minimise the risk, and lastly, whether the cost is grossly disproportionate to the risk. Considering Clause 37 of the Work Health and Safety Regulations refers to the maintenance of control measures, and it states that a duty holder who implements a control measure to eliminate or minimise risk to health and safety must ensure that the control measure is maintained so that it remains effective by ensuring that the control measure is and remains A, fit for purpose. For example, does the P2 mask fit properly on a worker's face? B, is suitable for the nature and duration of the work? And C, is installed and set up and used correctly? As an example, if we think about barriers to prevent workers from falling, we need to ensure that the control measures prevent the falls. Let's consider Clause 38 of the Work Health and Safety Regulations, which refers to reviewing of the control measures, and it states, a duty holder must review and, as necessary, revise control measures implemented so as to maintain a work environment that is without risk to health or safety. For example, a machine recently fixed with guarding and also training provided for the use of a particular machine needs to be fit for purpose. That is, it prevents an injury and doesn't create another hazard. Gary will now take us through the next couple of slides on hazard and risk identification and management.
Thanks, Stu. Okay, so we need to consider that risk management is a step-by-step process and that a safe and healthy workplace doesn't happen by chance. As part of the process, you need to deliberately consider what could go wrong in your workplace and what could be the consequences when things do go wrong, and what could you do to eliminate or minimise the health and safety risks you identify. Let's look at the considerations for identifying the hazards in the workplace. Hazards generally arise from the following aspects of work: the physical work environment, the equipment, materials and substances used, the work tasks and how they're performed, and the work design and management. In some cases, hazards are part of the work process, such as mechanical hazards or noise, or when using toxic substances. So when determining the best ways to manage the hazards and risks identified, we need to remember that 1, as mentioned earlier, consultation with workers is a key element. Secondly, some practical consultation methods include toolbox talks, pre-start meetings, work health safety meetings, and regular walkthroughs with worker representatives. Nextly, we can have regular review of workflow and work processes, and they're also key to managing workplace facilities in a safe condition. Then we should consider an effective risk management process is one that's reviewed often, as well as providing first aid equipment and training and implementing emergency plans, ensuring that there's discussion, consultation, coordination and cooperation with other duty holders, including the contractors and subcontractors, and implementing appropriate procedures for workers in remote and isolated workplaces. Managing work health and safety risks is an ongoing process that needs regular attention. In these next couple of slides, we'll consider some situations where a risk management approach is invaluable for ensuring the workplace hazards and risks are identified and adequate controls are put in place. For example, when an existing control measure is not working, so somebody's been injured or there's been a near miss, or when you're starting a new business or expanding an existing business, when you're establishing or changing work practices, work procedures, or the work environment, when you're establishing or changing the organisational structure or job roles, if you're introducing new workers or returning workers to the workplace, where you're purchasing new or used equipment, or using new substances, or when working with a new supplier, or if planning to improve productivity or reduce costs. Finally, when there's new information about workplace risk becoming available, or if responding to a workplace incident, even if there hasn't been an injury, or when responding to concerns raised by workers, HSR, or others in the workplace. In these next couple of slides, we'll have a look at the hierarchy of control measures, as detailed in Clause 36 of the Work Health Safety Regulations. In the hierarchy, elimination is the highest order of control for any risk. For example, doing assembly work on the ground rather than assembling at heights to eliminate the risk of falls. Clause 36 identifies that if it's not reasonably practical for a duty holder to eliminate the risk to health and safety, then they've got to implement risk control measures to minimise the risk and do one or more of the following: substituting, either wholly or partially, the hazard with something of a lesser risk, and then thereby reducing the hazard and introducing something safer, such as replacing solvent-based paints with water-based ones. Isolating the hazard by limiting access to it, installing a guard to prevent access to moving parts of machinery, for example. Implementing engineering controls by installing engineering solutions to limit workers' exposure to the hazard, such as using self-closing gates. Implementing administrative controls, such as erecting appropriate signage, following a safe work procedure, or providing appropriate information, training and supervision. And providing and use of suitable personal protection equipment to minimise the potential for injury, such as earmuffs, face masks, gloves and hard hats. Risk management often involves a combination of these measures. Steve is now going to take us through some risk management tools that are readily available online. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Yes, let's now take a look at the most common type of risk management tools you're likely to come across or may want to use. Firstly, let's consider the Safe Work Method Statement, which is a risk management tool and consultation tool in one, and is required by legislation for all high-risk construction work, but is also often used for non-high-risk work. When considering the Work Health and Safety Regulations, Clause 312 states that the principal contractor for a construction project must take all reasonable steps to obtain a copy of the Safe Work Method Statement relating to high-risk construction work before the high-risk work commences. And Clause 291 of the Work Health and Safety Regulations defines what is high-risk construction work. So the Safe Work Method Statement, or SWMS, commonly known as, is displayed on this slide and is available through the Safe Work New South Wales website, and also contains a list of high-risk construction work on the first page of that template. So a SWMS, or Safe Work Method Statement, is a valuable risk management tool used to identify the hazards and risk associated with the work task, and then identify how they'll be eliminated or controlled. So a SWMS prompts you to identify 1, the task that's involved, 2, the hazards and risk to health and safety associated with each task, and 3, the control measures to be put in place to manage these risks. There is also a risk assessment template, again available online through the Safe Work New South Wales website. This template can also be used to identify the hazards and risks associated with work tasks and prompts you to identify the actions required to implement effective control measures. As you can see, this risk assessment also prompts you to 1. Identify which workers are at risk, 2. Determine what factors are contributing to the hazards and risk, 3. Identify what kind of control measures should be implemented, and 4. To check the effectiveness of the existing control measures. Safe Work New South Wales produces a large number of guidance materials to assist in understanding the requirements of the work health and safety legislation. We encourage you to refer to the Code of Practice, How to Manage Work Health and Safety Risk, available through Safe Work New South Wales website. There are examples within this particular document to demonstrate how a risk management process can be used. In the next few slides, Gary will discuss psychological risk and the associated risk factors. Over to you, Gaz.
Thanks, Steve. Let's take a minute to consider that when the legislation talks about health and safety hazards and risks, it's referring to both physical and psychological hazards and risks. And so, any effective risk management strategy should include both physical and psychological risks. Considering that most of us spend about a third of our lives at work, it's certainly a large part of our daily lives and can have a considerable effect on our mental health, either in a positive or negative way. Controlling psychological risks in the workplace is good for worker wellbeing and good for business, as it generally leads to increased productivity, reduced workers' compensation claims, reduced absenteeism or presenteeism, which is when workers are at work but their mind is on other things, reduced turnover, and higher employment engagement and participation. Let's consider some of the common workplace factors that can impact workers' mental health, including high and low job demands, low job control, inadequate support, exposure to trauma, violence or aggression, workplace inequality, or poor change management, to name a few. These hazards can increase the risk of worker stress, which ultimately can lead to psychological injury. These risk factors can also lead to lack of concentration and poor productivity and can impact both workplace and personal relationships. Having an awareness of these hazards and how they occur in the workplace can help us take action to manage them and create a positive workplace culture. So Steve will now take us through the final slides in this presentation and discuss where to find additional resources and how you can get in touch with Safe Work New South Wales. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Gaz. Yes, one of these additional resources is our podcast series, also known as Safety Casts. They're very popular. Have a look at these or listen to these. These podcasts are available for different work health and safety topics in construction, including scaffolding, electrical safety, and working at heights, to name a few. They involve safe work inspectors discussing these topics and also contain information about additional resources available to the industry. As well as watching our other webinars in this supervisor series, we encourage you to tap into this additional Safety Cast resource, as they're great for toolbox talks with short, sharp messaging, and they're available online and on many media platforms and apps, including Spotify and Apple Play. Simply search for Safe Work Safety Cast in your search engine to access the latest of these podcasts, which tend to be very popular resources. There's also a large amount of guidance material available through the Safe Work New South Wales website. We have a building and construction specific page with a range of topics. This material will assist you to understand how to maintain high standards of health and safety on your workplace, or on your work site, and so reduce workplace injuries. We encourage you to access and read through this information. Simply visit the Safe Work New South Wales website and type your topic search into the search bar. Also, our Speak Up app. It allows you to advise us of any unsafe workplace activity you may encounter, and you can remain anonymous. The Speak Up app also allows you to upload photos as well. As they say, a picture can say 1,000 words. You can access this app through the Safe Work website and download from the App Store. Back to you, Gary.
Thanks, Steve. And in wrapping up this webinar, we'd like to remind you can always contact us on 13 10 50 to seek advice, to report a health and safety concern, or to speak to an inspector about a health and safety matter. Well, Steve, I believe that's a wrap. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you to everyone who attended the webinar. We really hope you found the information valuable.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And yes, thank you for joining us today, everyone, and we hope to see you again.